names in the Bible often had a great significance in a way they don't always seem to mean to us, except in something like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, where you've got bashful and happy and grumpy and dopey. But when Jesus called Simon Peter Rock, that meant something. Nobody laughed. Often people get the impression that St. Peter was always dashing around without thinking. When he saw Jesus on the bank when they was fishing, he jumped out the water with nothing on, just rushed to see him. When Jesus said, "You'll betray me," "Oh no, he's straight in, I won't." But Jesus called him Rock. But other names come up as well. Listen to this. It comes in chapter 8 of St. Mark's Gospel. Jesus and his disciples left for the villages around Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, Jesus put this question to them. "Who do people say I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist," they said. "Others say Elijah, others again one of the prophets." "But you," he said, "who do you say I am?" And Peter spoke up and answered and said, "You are the Christ." And Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone about him. And then he began to teach them that the Son of Man was destined to suffer grievously, to be rejected by the elders and chief priests and the scribes, and to be put to death, and on the third day to rise again from the dead. He said this all quite openly, and then taking him aside, Peter began to remonstrate with him. But turning and seeing his disciples, Jesus said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan, because the way you're thinking is not God's way, but man's." Imagine that. Rock, he called him. Now, Satan. Different moods, different times. And then, it's not just Peter. What do people call him? Jesus asks you, "Who do people say I am?" And then he asks you the question, "Who do you say I am?" So the name that Jesus addresses Simon by gives you a real impression of what he thinks of Simon. Rock. Someone you could depend on. But another time the way he's talking calls him Satan. And I think the two images of that man, of Jesus' attitude to Simon Peter, are reflected in what people think of Jesus. This bit of the Gospel, you know, is just not halfway through it. The Gospel of St. Mark has 16 chapters. And the first 7, Jesus is healing and preaching. And it's a lovely, comforting image. And through it, Peter had come to recognize that he was the Christ. But you know, the rest of that Gospel, another 9 chapters, 8 of them are heading towards death and suffering, and there's just one at the end of the resurrection. And that sums up perhaps how you accept Christ. Can you take both halves of his gospel? Because at that stage, Peter could really, make no mistake about it, Peter had come to a fantastic realization of who Jesus was. To say you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. It's the man he knew. He knew the way he blew his nose, the way he walked or talked or ate. But he saw in him the Christ. That was extraordinary revelation. I wonder if Peter himself was amazed that he had said it. But then Jesus comes on to the second part that is going to happen, the suffering. And Peter can't take that. Oh, no, 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 no. And I can understand Jesus getting annoyed with him. Jesus didn't want to go through with it. He was really trying. He's got to force himself to go to Jerusalem, ready to do what he thinks his mission is. He wants support. And so when someone tries to stop him, oh, get behind me, Satan. You can understand that. And so what do people think of Jesus? Comforting, healer. Yes, they can accept that. But when Jesus says there will be pain on the cross, or rather when it comes, how often do people say, where is God now? How can there be a good God if he allows this to happen? Whether a tsunami or an earthquake, people dying, or just now looking across Europe, all these refugees, the suffering they're going through, have lost family and home, many of them, children being drowned. How can God allow that? There's no answer, we can't explain it, but Jesus is saying, can you still follow me? Because this is what is going to happen. I haven't left you behind. I will be suffering with you. And when the suffering comes, I don't think your first reaction is always the one which really means most. I remember one woman, her daughter died at the age of 22. And she was so angry. It wasn't a sudden death. We knew 2 years before that she was gradually going to die of the disease. Never going to church again. What's the use of the way God has treated me? Really angry. Later, she came back. She really loved Jesus. She really loved God. But it was the hurt and the anger which made her answer like that. And that is how people think of Jesus. But remember the next question. Who do you say I am? What does Jesus mean to you? One person might say, my whole world would be empty without him. Do you think of him as a friend? Perhaps a father figure? I remember when I was a little boy standing in Ilford Broadway where I was brought up, and there were trucks and buses hurtling past. I wasn't afraid because I was holding my dad's hand. Nothing could go wrong in my mind. Is that the image of God? I remember one child once, I was standing outside church and she held hold the leg of my trousers, total confidence, nothing frightened her, until she realized I wasn't her daddy, and then she screamed. But that image of that trust in God, is that the image? Give some time to think, because this is very personal. Who do you say Jesus is? What would be your name, or is there an expression which you can really sum up what Jesus means to you? In trying to find it, you probably come closer to him. And then think of the times when you have been hurt or you might be hurt. Some friends of mine this last week, the police came to their door in Maryland in the United States early in the morning to say, your son, I think he was in his 20s or 30s, your son died. He's dead. They knew no more. They just had come and break the news. How did they feel? Sometimes it can produce anger. What is God doing with me? And other times, people just brings them closer. Lord, help us. Lord, and sometimes the suffering. But if not, it would send you away. Don't mind about the first reaction. Look to come back to Jesus. But then, remember, he called Simon a rock, steadfast. Another time, because he was reacting, he says, Satan. Now here's a prayer for you. What would Jesus call you? Give it some thought and stay with it. I find there are two ways of doing it. One is looking at the gifts and graces in my life, the way God has treated me, and that might give me an image of what God is thinking of me. Another way, I've tried this, I simply sit down and say, Jesus, what would you call me? And the answer doesn't come straight away, but give it time, it'll become clear. And don't be afraid to accept it. I suggested this to one woman, actually nothing to do with it. She was in a terrible state, a very good woman. She'd fallen desperately in love with a man who was married. And I know the way she was talking, I know the woman herself was not going to do anything wrong. But she was in turmoil. Anyway, she took this prayer, something like it, and she came back. Now, to my surprise, she simply said, I think the name is gift. I have received so many gifts, and I think I have been a gift to other people. Don't be afraid to accept, it's not showing off, that Jesus will say to you what he thinks of you, and let him say it. But then at another time you might give thought to this. When would Jesus say to you, as he said to St. Peter, that holy man, get behind me, Satan? Not necessarily because you've done some wicked sin. For Peter to want Jesus not to suffer, that was hardly what we call a sin, was it? But it was the wrong way of thinking. If there's some people you can't stand, say they just shouldn't be allowed to become near us and so on. It's that writing off of people, that wrong attitude to certain people. Even a racism. Get behind me, Satan. I don't know, it's something quite personal. But names which we give to Christ, home in on a name or a number of names, and that will bring us to understand what Jesus means to you, and also hear what Jesus might call you. And you come to realize just how much you mean to him and how close you are. Not just realizing it, but in the process, this is a prayer, in the process of doing it, then you come closer to Christ, simply by your realizing it. And so that through everything, you then might see the face of Christ. I just finished with a Celtic blessing. Where the sun awakens the day, where the road winds on its way, where the fields are sweet with hay, may you see the Lord. Where the leaves are gently rustling, where the marketplace is bustling, where the rush hour crowds are jostling, may you see the Lord. Where the stars shine in the sky, where the streets so peaceful lie, where darkness now is nigh, may you see the Lord. Amen.